The toolbar, or rather I should call it the main toolbar, is this area here you can see at the top of the screen. And this contains quite a lot of key icons for Macs. So probably the easiest thing for me to do is to run through them left to right, and I'll explain what each one does. And later, when I go into the tutorial, you'll probably get an understanding of these in a little bit more detail. Okay, starting on the left, we've got two icons which are related to each other. We've got undo and redo. What these allow you to do is, like in a lot of software, is to actually undo something that you've just done. So in this case, I'm going to scale the teapot on the y-axis, and I've made a mistake. Oops, didn't really mean to do that. So we can go up to the undo button, and we've just undone it. Oh, that was a mistake. I didn't actually intend to undo that. So again, you can go to the redo button and click on that, and it'll redo the action that you've just undone. If you right click on the undo button, it'll actually bring up a menu, and you can select and undo multiple actions. So in this case, it's using the default number of undos, which is 20. So if I select all of those, there we go, and undo that, it'll take us back to a point where the teapot was undistorted. So you can see it's a very powerful feature, being able to undo multiple levels. So that's pretty cool. To the right of the undo buttons, I should point out that the keyboard shortcut for undo is Control-Z. But as with many of the keyboard shortcuts in Macs, you can actually customize that to be whatever you want. Okay, to the right of the undo buttons is the select and link button. What this allows you to do is to basically create hierarchies in Macs where, as an example, you create let's say a gun, and you want to put an element on that gun, like a trigger. And what you want to happen is, when the gun is moved, you want the trigger to move with it. And to do that, you would use this tool to actually link the trigger to the gun. By doing this, you can create hierarchies. As an example, you can create hierarchies to represent the human body. You know, you could create a pelvis and then attach a spine to it, and then attach the spine you could have the shoulders, and attach to the shoulders you have the arms, and so forth. And again, if you didn't want to use bones, which we'll come to later, you could create a human figure by linking objects together using the link tool. When you want to unlink a selection, use the unlink tool. So basically, you select an object that's linked to another object, click on the unlink tool, and that object will become unlinked to that object. So it actually breaks the link on the current object that you have selected, or if you have more than one selected, on all those objects. So it's quite a powerful tool there. Okay, something that we'll come to later is space warps, and they're used to produce various effects, wind, rain. Well, rather they'd be used, for instance, with particles to produce gravity, things like that. But they can also be used to distort objects, so they're actually quite a wide-ranging feature. But for instance, if you created a space warp and you wanted this teapot to be affected by it, you would click on the teapot, click on the bind to space warp, and then it will draw a line from the teapot, and then you can click on the space warp, and that space warp will then affect that teapot. So that's what this is for. Here we have the selection filter, and what that allows us to do is, if we have a complex scene and we have a number of different types of objects in it, we can actually limit what we can currently select by choosing one of these options here. So as an example, we've got lots of lights in our scene, let's say. We could say, I just want to select a sofa in the scene. So I could say, let's limit my selection to geometry, and then when I try to select any lights in the scene, I'd only be able to select the sofa, or, well, in this case, a teapot. Let me show you how that works exactly. I put on lights. There aren't any lights in the scene, so I can't actually select anything at the moment. There you go. So quite an important thing to actually check, I suppose. If you're trying to select objects in the scene, you can't select anything. Just check that you haven't turned on filters, selection filters. To the right of selection filters is the select objects icon. One of the things that can happen is when you actually select an object using this icon here, which is select and move. Oops, there we go. I forgot to put the filter back to geometry. let's do that. That's a good object lesson. In this case, I'm using select and move. If I select the teapot, you can see that immediately the transform gizmo becomes active. And this isn't always a good thing, because it may be that the teapot is actually exactly where you want it to be in the scene. You don't want to disturb it, so by turning on the select tool, you can purely just select an object and have no transforms active by default. So that's actually quite useful sometimes. Select by name tool. This actually brings up a list of all the objects in the scene, and this allows you to type in wildcards here. For instance, if you had 28 teapots, you could type in teapot and it would select all the teapots in your scene. It also allows you to select by type, select by color, select by size, and it also allows you to filter out objects in the scene. So if I filter none, and then add geometry, it'll only show me geometry in the scene. If I say lights, it'll only show me lights in the scene. So I haven't got any lights at the moment, so it doesn't really show anything. So let's put it back to all. A very useful tool, and it's used quite a lot, so it's something that you'll have to get used to pretty quickly. To the right of that is the method for selection. Now at the moment, if I want to select multiple objects, I can click on a part of the screen, drag, and you can see it creates a rectangular marquee. When I leave go, anything inside that marquee is selected. But on some occasions you don't want it to be a rectangle, so you can choose between a circle, or rather I should say ellipse. There we go. Oh no, it is actually a circle. So you can select everything inside a circle, which is actually quite useful sometimes when you're working with a circular object and you want to select, say, just a certain radius of that object or a certain radius of vertices. You can do a custom marquee. In this case it's a linear one, so you just basically draw, and to finish it you go back to the first point and it'll select everything inside there. Or you can do a freehand marquee. So in this case you just draw a custom curve, there we go, and anything inside that curve is selected. So again, pretty useful tools, which you might use on certain occasions if you want to get a certain selection. Like I said, it's very common to use those tools on very fine selections, maybe on vertices. So yeah, again, pretty useful tools. Then you have window crossing or window, what are the two options? Window or window crossing, I think they're called. This is quite a fine distinction. What this basically does is when you have a bunch of vertices, let me show you this on this object. I think it actually bears demonstration. Okay, now what this will allow me to do, if I do a selection here, actually let me do it with faces because it's much more relevant then. Okay, that's working. Now if I select a face and I only go halfway over a face, which you can see on these faces here, and I leave go, you can see that it doesn't select the faces. So that's the second option. With the first option, if I only semi-select a face, it will actually select it. So again, it depends on the circumstance that you're working on, whether you want to select everything only inside the window or anything that the window crosses, hence the name of the option. So let me just undo what I've just done there. Put the teapot back to a normal teapot. That's great. Okay, and to the right of these tools you can see you've got the three translation tools, and these basically correspond to the three translation tools that I showed you earlier. In other words, W is for transform, E is for rotation, and R is for scale. So you can see that as I'm pressing those keys, these icons are becoming active. To the right of the transform tools, you can see that you have the transform reference. Now this may need a little bit of explaining. I'll actually have to show this to you, otherwise it really won't make much sense. Each object in a 3D package has its own transform matrix, and basically what that means is that the world is one big transform matrix, and in this case is represented by this grid, and in the center of the world, which is at this point here, the intersection of the grid is 0, 0, 0 in X, Y, and Z. Now every object that you then create in the scene has its own transform matrix, and in this case you can see this teapot has got its own transform matrix, which is represented by